Welcome. The students in our class are here and will experience something very, very wonderful and unusual. I want to open with some remarks, and then we have some information about one of our founders, Robert Harris, and then Dean Leader will introduce something. But it's my honor as the director of the center to talk about, first of all, our 25th anniversary, but also to acknowledge how we got here. There's a phrase that they use about people standing on the shoulders of giants, and in no place is that more true than in this lecture series. 25 years ago, a professor of sociology, John Steiner, who was with us, through his sheer force of will, made sure that the Holocaust would be remembered, but not just remembered, but used as a moral lesson. And that was at a time when Holocaust education was not the way it is today, with hundreds of thousands of books and teacher seminars and memorials, etc. And to a certain extent, John Steiner, through sheer force of will, made this series happen. So I am grateful to him for what he has done to get us here today. But more than that, I want to personally acknowledge his own contribution to my education and my being here and standing here today. I studied with John. He was a hard taskmaster. He challenged me in many ways. Sometimes I met the challenge, and there were times I did not meet the moral challenges that he presented to me. But he was always there in my ear, and I am grateful because he set a standard for me that I know I must reach for. So in many, many ways, you are here and experiencing the 25th Holocaust lecture series because John Steiner knew how important it was for us to learn about the Holocaust, forming our personalities and our attitudes as citizens. So John, thank you. But it wasn't just John. We're very lucky today to have some other people here, and I want to acknowledge them. One of whom sits right next to John, and that's Carol Hurwitz. She is responsible for organizing the first conference on women in the Holocaust on the West Coast. And once again, through just being a dynamo and single-minded in her purpose, we had a conference when I was a student here that was quite remarkable. She also was very deeply involved in the early years of the lecture series, helping to make it what it is today. And Carol, it's wonderful to see you. There's some other people that I would like to acknowledge. Some who are here, I see them sitting right there. The early faculty, an advisory board, Les Adler, and Richard Zimmer is not here. Ken Marcus, who was on the advisory board. Don't see anybody else. I would also like to acknowledge Bob Karlsrud, the previous dean of the School of Social Sciences, who was the man who had his hand on the checkbook, as it were. Also our president, Ruben Armignana. has been very influential in keeping us going through thick and through thin. And Marnie Olson is here, and that's Ruben's wife. And she, I have been told, this was when I was away, would come and sit in the auditorium before it was remodeled and listen to the lecture series. So it's nice to have you here again. Of course, we want to remember Paul Banco, who was the other faculty member who was a survivor. Both John and Paul were survivors of death camps. They brought to the series an imperative based on their experience. And I know I'm going to forget someone, but I want to thank the current dean for putting us in hyperdrive when she came because of her connections at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And it was her ability to give us an entree to some of the scholars there that has made this a world-class lecture series. I'd also like to thank Marie Zucker for having a boyhood friend named Michael Berenbaum. Michael said, of course, when we approached him about coming the first time. This is the second time he's spoken here. I'd like to acknowledge people in the Alliance who I have a long history with, both friendship, and they have certainly helped us in many ways, including helping us raise money, and that's Sylvia Super. Sylvia was there at the beginning. Virgil and Sharon Miller, who were there at the beginning. And then, so that, the students I can see are going. I'd also like to thank someone who's not with us, who was definitely a moral force, and that was, and I unfortunately never got to meet him, but Otto Springer was a rescuer who came to speak to students. But we also have here today Newt Dybee, Danish rescuer and known as one of the righteous among the nations. So we also would like to thank people who aren't here, or who are here. Lillian Judd, who many of you have seen come and talk about her experience. Hank Cohen. Al and Suzanne Batstuff. So, Hildy, I looked right at you and forgot to acknowledge you. I'm sorry. Hildy Cat. So look around. Did I forget someone?
Robert Harris?
Well, Barbara's going to do it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I would like to leave you before we introduce Michael with the thought that we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and it may seem very easy now, although it isn't. But they were the people who helped us get to where we are 25 years later. I'm now going to introduce Barbara, who is the president of the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust at Sonoma State University, who has some words to say about Robert.
Those of you in the lecture series already know. One of these days, maybe by the 50th, we'll have this microphone not squeak. It's a pleasure as the current president of the Alliance to be introducing the Robert L. Harris Memorial Lecture and providing a bit of background and the community group that supports the lecture series. Robert Harris was a World War II vet who had retired, and his wife Claire, to Sonoma County after a distinguished career in school teaching and administration, which included directing a school for troubled youth. He became active in the Jewish community and decided that a contribution he could make was to ensure that students at all levels were educated about the Holocaust. A Warsaw Ghetto Uprising memorial had been done for years by a group in Petaluma that then became an annual Yom HaShoah event, chaired this year by Gesher Kelmanson. And all of you will be getting information. Yes, applause is appropriate. It's a good job. All of you in the lecture series will be getting information about this year's celebration and commemoration, which is going to be May 4th. The group included, that initial group of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, two really exceptional, Simon Jaffe and Joe Rappaport, who had emigrated from Europe and were in the U.S. during World War II, and Irv Newman, who had been running the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising events. There was a Yom HaShoah commemoration at Sonoma State in 1983 in the Commons, and for me that was my first contact with this whole group. The university president, Peter Diamandopoulos, was the keynote speaker. After the event, he challenged Robert, that year's coordinator, to do more than just memorialize the Holocaust at an event one day a year. And he began the University Community Partnership. And part of the justification for founding the group was training teachers. And we continue to do a lot to work with teachers, and particularly through the Center for the Study of the Holocaust and Genocide that Myrna is responsible for. There's a summer program information about that on the table out front. It soon became apparent that Sonoma State was an ideal place for a permanent program given Professor Steiner's role and Professor Benko's role. And during the spring of 1983, Robert asked a number of people, including Professor Benko, to assist him in responding to that challenge. One of the first was Joel Newberg, who was working at the Holocaust Library and Research Center in San Francisco. It was established in 1978 by survivors. And the center had sponsored lectures, but not a consistent program. He also invited Sylvia Suker, a retired teacher who'd recently moved to the area from New York and had met Robert through his wife Claire and her volunteer work with Hadassah. One of Dr. Steiner's first students, Virgil Miller, who had been going to the memorials, was also invited to join that initial group. And also added to that were rabbis, ministers like Evie Sackler, another of Professor Steiner's students, Eugene Kravis, Irv Newman, and another local survivor, Walter Kuttner. And you've heard us speak about Walter Kuttner earlier in this series. Sylvia remembers Robert Harris as an infatigable leader with enormous determination who was able to work with all types of people, an inspiration. As Joel Newberg recalls, Robert was a one-person organization. He knew what needed to be done, faced with groups and individuals, and handled all the fundraising. He would just say, "Your share is this much, write me a check." I wish I had that ability. It would save us a lot of time. By the way, those of you who'd like to write a check, there are some envelopes on the table as well. The Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust was formed on behalf of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and the need to tell their stories and learn from their experiences. Those who began this collaborative effort between the community and the members of Sonoma State University faculty promised to let the world know of the atrocities that had occurred. The initial intention was primarily, as Evie said, learn the facts, act on them, and never forget. And from that, the lecture series began. Initially 5 to 6 lectures a year, which grew into this GE university course, which annually enrolls 100 students. Professor Steiner became the first director of the center, and Professor Myrna Goodman, then a returning student working toward her bachelor's degree, was the first student assistant hired by the center. The board now includes members of the community, university faculty and administrators, and students who have participated in the lecture series. Its current mission is to co-sponsor the lecture series, support the Center for the Study of the Holocaust and Genocide in providing programming to the larger community, including kindergarten through 12th grade and teachers, and to collaborate with other community groups working with issues related to the Holocaust and genocide. After Robert's death, the members of the Alliance decided to name an annual lecture in this series as a tribute to his unswerving dedication and commitment to Holocaust education. We're truly indebted to Robert for his vision and his leadership. For those of you interested in the history of the series, now in its 25th year, I'm happy to chat with you. For those members of the community here, there are directions to a reception for you after the lecture. And I would like to just take this opportunity to thank the current members of the Alliance, if they would please just stand for a second. They've been working and setting stuff up. We know you're here. Christine is up in the back. And thank you so much for all your work.
Okay, my name is Elaine Leader. I'm the Dean of the School of Social Science, but I also happen to be a survivor's daughter out of Lithuania. And so when I got to Sonoma State, I was thrilled to find the program, and in fact have taught a couple of classes before I got here. I taught both at the Holocaust Memorial Museum as a visiting, as well as at my previous university, where I taught classes in the Holocaust. So this is very near and dear to my heart, needless to say. And I think there's somebody that we really do have to thank for the way that it continues to be alive, thrive, and now move into a national reputation. And we need to thank Myrna Goodman for all of that. Well, once I got here, obviously going on here for years, and I just wanted to help take it to another level. And so in the process, as a scholar at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, I became involved with the Committee on Conscience, and you're going to meet Jerry Fowler here in a couple of weeks. And there's lots of talk about other genocides, and so certainly at this point we have involved people from the Armenian genocide, with Christine Davidian being part of the Alliance. We have the Rwandan genocide, and you'll hear from Mathilde next week, or in 2 weeks, I believe. And we have also involved people from the Cambodian genocide under the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot. And a number of years ago, Barbara organized, and the Alliance organized a fabulous event that honored all of the survivors who lived in the Sonoma County area. And I think there were over 75 people, survivors, who were honored at that time. It was quite a wonderful event where we honored the dead, but then we danced together to life. And as a result of all of that and a lot of conversations, we got this idea that we really needed to have a lasting memorial here on campus. And so, and I don't want to take time from the talk that Michael's going to give, but we have a wonderful little DVD, and we're going to show that right now, because I want you to know about the lasting memorial that we're about to be building on this campus within the summer, and also to your participation in this lasting memorial to Holocaust and genocide. And so if you would please cue the lights and show the video, and then that's it. What happened?
We're not going to remember it. And if we don't remind the younger generation, it can be forgotten.
We lost has affected a lot personally and in a large way the loss of my beloved country.
At that time I was, I think, about 3 years old. 17 of my relatives were killed. And by the time I was almost 4, I was forced to work out in the field.
I was 22, 23 years old. My story was living in there.
I'm a third-generation Armenian American, and my grandparents survived the Armenian genocide of 1915, in which 1.5 million Armenians were killed by the Turkish government. My grandmother used to have a saying that really affected me deeply. She used to say to me, "Nothing is sweeter than water."
And now at the time, how lucky we were to be there then. Because just then they turned on the water for us to wash. But it refreshed us, it felt good. Some 15 minutes before that, a group of our families were there. Only they got the gas instead of the water.
My mom, my dad, brothers and sisters, and my family. I can't forget that I lost them in only one day, only because they were Tutsis.
But the way to prevent a repetition of genocide is to conserve memory.
And working with Jan Young, who is a professor of sculpture at Sonoma State University, it was put forward the idea to develop a Holocaust and Genocide Memorial Grove at Sonoma State University. This was recently approved by Sonoma State University, and the installation will be unveiled probably in late 2008. There are 2 railroad tracks which are 40 feet in length. They start at standard railroad width, and as they proceed, diminish in width to what will be an illuminated tower. Railroad ties will actually be comprised of laser-engraved memorial bricks, and these bricks will be our memories of those who have endured the suffering from the genocide, whether it's Armenia, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's Cambodia, Rwanda, now Darfur. And it is the artist's belief that as we go through education and we learn about the horrors of genocide, that will represent the hope that there will be diminished incidents of genocide and mass murder in the future.
I'm Jan Nunn. I'm the designer of the Holocaust and Genocide Memorial Grove. I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to have a lasting monument on campus. So the actual tracks then will converge to the base of the tower. This represents 10 feet of stacked laminated glass, and it's on a 1-foot black granite base. It will have an inscription. The inside of the tower is going to be internally illuminated. So at nightfall, the Memorial Grove will be very subtly illuminated from the inside of the glass tower. Most all of my work deals with social and political and personal issues. And I thought this was a good opportunity to explore an area of social concern, not only to me personally, but hopefully to society in general.
The lecture series was started by a group of survivors and social activists at Sonoma State with the goal of learning and remembering in the service of prevention. And I think that what we now also need to do is to preserve for posterity the many people who have been the victims of genocide, and to give people the ability to memorialize those people.
I think it's a wonderful way to have expose students and educate students on the Armenian genocide and all genocides, because this grove is actually going to be a multi-genocidal grove, which I believe is probably one of its kind.
You know, 100 years from now, we can go and show people that these are the names of my people. We are dead, they can go and still find that structure. So for me, I think any kind of physical structure is part of the whole remembrance, and it can help people to move forward.
I've gotten to meet people whose lives were also touched by other genocides, and I really see the parallels in their experience and my experience, and the need for us to reach out to the next generations, particularly as the generation of those who survived the Holocaust is slipping away from us.
So it actually validates for the Armenians a place to go where, you know, a place of higher learning, just that it did happen, it does exist, and here is a physical representation for that.
I know how important it's going to be both for this campus, for the community, and for keeping the memory of genocide very much a presence as we begin to teach more and more students on this campus.
We put this DVD together because we're hoping that you might be willing and interested in participating in the development of this grove. The grove will have, as described, the tracks, but we will also have commemorative bricks, which will be available for individuals and families and groups to be able to inscribe the names of people that they would like to remember, or in some way testimony about their participation in Holocaust or other genocides. People will be able to choose between, for the Holocaust, Cambodian, Rwandan, Armenian, or other genocides. We have two types of bricks available. One will be a 4x8, which will be available for $100, and another 8x8 that will be $250. You may purchase these bricks by contacting Kate McClintock of the Alumni Office at Sonoma State. She may be reached at area code 707-64-2693 or at kate.mcclintock@sonoma.edu. Please join us. We're excited to have you participate in this project.
Lights, please. Okay, finally. I'm about to introduce someone whose curriculum vitae or resume is 17 pages long. Don't worry. I'll give you the highlights. Presently, Michael Berenbaum is the director of the Sigi Zeri Center for the Study of the Holocaust and Ethics at a Jewish university in Los Angeles. He is also a professor of Jewish studies. He's a writer, lecturer, and teacher, consulting in the conceptual development of museums and the development of historical film. That's very general. Michael was involved with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum from its inception. He served for a decade as a project director, and then he was the first director of the Research Institute. He has been the president and chief executive officer of Steven Spielberg's The Survivor of the Shoah Visual History Foundation. Gathered interviews with over 50,000 Holocaust survivors from 32 countries and 57 languages. He's the author of 18 books, scores of scholarly articles, and hundreds of journalistic pieces. I could delineate them for you, but we don't need to have any of those delineated to know what a distinguished and important person Michael Berenbaum is in the field of Holocaust study. We are most honored to have him here and most grateful that he would come. So why don't you welcome him?
Thank you very much, Myrna. I normally feel deeply uncomfortable because after they say all of these wonderful things about me, you get up to speak and you can either disappoint or fulfill, and it puts a little bit of pressure. Special day because, as she said, my college roommate, and I say this to the benefit of the students, my college roommate, Murray Zucker, is here. We bummed around Israel for over 2 years, did a couple of days of work, and neither of us expected that the other one would amount to anything. We were very confident that we would be all right, but the other guy, and I just had a wonderful opportunity of spending the afternoon with his much better half, Roberta. And therefore, those of you who understand that you're at a stage where you're going to make friends who not only will be friends of a lifetime, but friends who accompany you through a lifetime. Understand how precious that is, and understand when you share time with someone you've known now for decades, and who you win and with whom you share good moments and bad moments and live moments, and you've been through the whole journey of life, and you've been through all of the excitement of the college experience, and we went through war together and all of that stuff. It's a very special and very wonderful relationship. I'm also honored that this is the 25th anniversary year. I did not begin this lecture series, though I have to tell you, last month I was invited back to a lecture series that I did begin 25 years ago, and we signed an agreement that were the scholar and I are both alive and well 25 years from today, we would come back to celebrate the 50th anniversary if there was anybody who was willing to hear us. I want to tell one more joke, only because last night I spent the evening with a brand new film on the victimization of Jehovah's Witnesses. And somebody asked me a very interesting question. This will be a preamble. Somebody asked me a very interesting question. How do people go through this and still maintain any sense of it all? And I said, you know, one of the ways in which victims went through this event sometimes had a very unorthodox means, which was humor. So the guy challenged me. He said, tell me what humor came out of the Holocaust. And those of you who know me for a while know that I have collected, for the only book that I will probably ever publish or have published posthumously, I've collected a collection of humor. And the reason I don't want to publish it while I'm alive is I don't want anybody to say I made a joke out of us or a joke book out of the Holocaust. But I told two stories that illustrate it and will serve as a transition for the first thing I want to say. The first is two Jews are sitting, and one is reading the Jewish newspaper and weeping, and the other is reading Der Stürmer, which is the German propaganda paper that was viciously anti-Semitic, and smiling. One guy's name was Moshe, and the other guy, in those days it was Moshe. The other guy's name was Yankel. And Moshe turns to Yankel and says, how can you read such a terrible paper? And he says, you don't understand that when I read the Jewish paper, I see how things are terrible, how discrimination is set in and persecution has set in, how oppressed we are and how much we're losing our freedom, and how much every part of the future looks more bleak than even the present, and I want to kill myself. But when I read this, all of a sudden I discover that Jews are powerful, that we control the world, that President Roosevelt is in our pocket. And tell me something, which would you like to read? And the other one that I like, and you can tell that I'm not a professional comedian, but the other one that I like is a very important one because it also says something very powerful. Young boy is asked, what would you most of all if you were Hitler's son? You think of a Mercedes, a mansion, you know, lots of things. He said, I'd like to be orphaned. And there's a fantastic way in which humor has the capacity to undermine even the most horrific of circumstances and to inject light to it. So let's use that for one moment as a preface. What I want to do with you this afternoon is 4 things. I want to talk about things that I will hope to make interesting to the students, but I think they're vital, which are transformations, important transformations in our understanding of the Holocaust, in our research about the Holocaust, and go through about 3 of those which will shape it. I also want to talk about where we are at this moment in time. And you see it here because we are at a very special moment in time. We are the last generation to live in the presence of survivors. And we will, in all probability, be making the transition from the moment when something goes to from living memory to historical memory. I just got off the phone 10 minutes before we began with someone who was writing a story about the creation of the Armenian Museum in Washington, D.C., the Museum to the Armenian Genocide. They asked me what was the major difference, and I said, look, the major difference is the Armenian Museum is now being created when the last survivor is in their late 90s. And that is the only survivor who has a visual recollection, an actual recollection of it is now in their mid-90s. And we were created at a very special moment when survivors are with us, but we are now at that transitional moment. And I look at my friend Newt Darby, who was a rescuer, and I see Newt looks terrific, but I've known Newt for 20 or 25 years, and 25 years ago you were slightly younger. I was much younger, but he was slightly younger. We're at a transitional moment, and we now have a different type of research that is taking place, and I want to talk to you about that because that will present the opportunity for students of every genocide. The last thing I want to touch on is where we are in the great dream of all of us who work in this area that recollection of the past would transform the future. And I'm going to give you, none of this is joyous news to you, but I'm going to tell you what the weaknesses have been in that argument and how one can teach when the prevalence and the possibility of genocide occurring and the recurring of inaction. So let's go through that in a very particular way. Changes a little bit in research. Let me first talk about the killers, and then I want to talk about their victims. There is an absolutely astounding series of events taking place now in the Ukraine and very soon in Lithuania. There is a French priest by the name of Father Dubois, who is now engaging in something that's going to be quite astounding. It's what we're going to call in the professional field, and for want of a better term, the archaeology of genocide. Father Villeroy, for reasons only his confessor or his psychiatrist may know, has been going through community after community after community in the Ukraine and meeting with people. He goes with a clerical collar, and he's been meeting with the senior people in the town, the last who have any recollection of Jewish remnants. And what he's been getting from them are descriptions of the date in 1941 and 42 when the mobile killing units, or let me put it to you this way, more accurately, when there were massacres of Jews that occurred in the towns, the villages, the cities, and the hamlets throughout the Ukraine. By tradition, we used to say these events were perpetrated by the mobile killing units, the Einsatzgruppen, the 3,000 men who entered with German troops, who went to the city whose assignment was to round up the Jewish population, Soviet commissars, gypsies, to move them to a valley, to a wadi, and to shoot them by one by one. That story, and there's been a fascinating debate in the 90s as to who these men were. Now, women, I use the word men, gender specifically, because these were all men. Do not take umbrage. Does not mean that women were not capable of doing it. It means the Germans did not employ their women to do it. There was a debate that shaped the 90s. It was essentially a debate between two scholars, and a third one stepped in and get the same traction. The debate is what we call the ordinary Germans versus ordinary men debate, the Goldhagen-Browning debate, which the debate was who were the perpetrators. And it was Christopher Browning who wrote a beautiful and very important book called Ordinary Men on Police Battalion 101, who argued that these were ordinary men who were put in an extraordinary situation for a whole series of reasons, ended up and becoming swiftly efficient and effective killers. Came to three very disquieting findings in addition to the ultimate thing. Number one, none of these men were forced to do what they did. They could have gotten out if they said, I refuse. But if they refused, their career would not go well, and they would lose face in front of their comrades. Some of them nevertheless said, I refuse, and those who refused had two things. They either were dropped from the unit, or they were assigned to assignments back at the base or back at the forward camp, and in essence said, okay, you don't have the courage, you don't have the tenacity, or what the Germans called the nerves of steel it takes to do this type of thing. The second discovery he made was that the people needed alcohol after, and gradually they needed alcohol during and alcohol before. That's good news for humanity, because essentially it meant that people can't spend their days killing men, women, and children all day without taking a particular toll on themselves. That's good news for us, because they can spend their time killing men, women, and children, but they could do so only at penalty to themselves. Now you have to understand, these Einsatzgruppen murdered for the most part by machine gun. And when we come to a discussion of Rwanda, I want you to understand that the difference was Rwanda had mobile killing units, but they murdered by machete. Murdering by machine gun means I, God forbid, standing here and please Dean do not have a heart attack, could essentially wipe out most of this room. Going by machete, I would literally have to stand within arm's length of each person. And you have to imagine what it takes to go between arm's length of each person, person by person by person. But the point of Browning was we have to look at what takes ordinary men, makes them killers. He looked at conformity. He looked at a sense of career advancement. He looked at a sense of cowardly, a fear of being branded a coward. And he looked for the certain sense of conformity and discipline that was required. His protagonist in this debate was a man by the name of Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, who wrote a very important book called Hitler's Willing Executioners. And his argument was it wasn't the ordinary men, it was Germans who were educated in ideology that took them from eliminist anti-Semitism to exterminationist anti-Semitism. In English, it means that they went from the idea that we're going to get rid of the Jews from among us to we're going to what they called exterminate, what everybody else should call murder, because we exterminate rats and vermin, but we murder human beings, murder people, and eliminate the Jews for once and for all by death. And he saw it as an expression of deep and profound, vicious ideology that made it easy for these men to make the transition. And we know from the early research that the vast majority of these men were not what we would call sadists or masochists. They were a cross-section of personnel. One was an opera singer, the other was a minister. Many were lawyers, and in fact their officers were for the most part deeply college educated, which has implications for diversity and for whether we turn out moral people or really effective people in the tasks for which they're assigned. The debate remained unresolved, but several things developed over the last 10 years that were interesting. There was a book by Jan T. Gross called Neighbors. Jan T. Gross went back to a village in Poland called Jedwabne and interviewed the people and found something startling, which is that the Germans killed the Jews. The Poles, the neighbors, killed the Jews. They used the occasion of the Germans being in the area to murder their neighbors. They blamed it on the Germans, and they told all sorts of stories that all of them knew were untrue about how the Germans did it. And they had developed a collective memory of murder, nothing to do with what had happened. And the reason they had killed the Jews is because they had learned that the Germans were killing the Jews. Why let them kill the Jews and get the rewards? The possession of homes, the possession of material, the looting and whatever have you. If we kill our own, blame it on the Germans, we can, as it were, benefit from the whole thing. Enter Father Dubois. And what Dubois has done is to interview at to midnight. Meaning if it's 1941, 1941 is 67 years ago. A person 10 is 77, a person 20 is 87. A person 25 is 93, and chances are that a person 30 at 97 is no longer with us. People may not have recollections, but he's interviewed all of the people, or many of the people in these areas. And what he's then done is to do something else that nobody had ever dared do, and he probably could do it, in fact, because he's a priest. If any rabbi had done it, I dare say crucified, but I don't mean it in the literal sense, because we are not allowed to dig up mass graves by tradition. He's dug up mass graves, and what he's done is to go for the physical material evidence of the digging up of the mass graves. Now, you discover certain things that are very interesting, and certain things that are powerful. What do people carry with them? One of the most interesting things that you see that virtually anyone who died with any clothing on had with them were keys. And when we did an exhibition at Belgians, we had an exhibition of keys. And I was startled because people look at keys and they become absolutely shaken, because the reality is, until the invention of the swipe card, none of us left home without what? Without our keys. And there was something in that sense so ordinary about leaving your keys. It also means what? If you leave your keys, you expect to what? Come home. He then discovered something else. He discovered what bullets the people were killed with. Now that becomes, if you've ever worked on homicides, that's very critical information, because it can tell you who was shot by the Wehrmacht, which is the German army, who were shot by the SS, which had a different type of ammunition, who were shot by the local gendarmerie and the local police, and who were shot by the ordinary folk who didn't have similar ammunition, not army issued or military issued or SS issued or police issued, but the type of shotguns that people have in their home, the type of pistols people have around their home. And what he's been able to do is to go through town by town, village by village, city by city, and come to a statement as to who was the killer in that circumstance. And he discovers that the loop of responsibility is enormously larger. And then he discovered something, which is when metaphor hits reality. If you read this literature, and you read the literature of the reports of what happened, and this is the reports of bystanders, people speak about the ground moving for days. Anybody who's read this literature speaks about the ground moving for days. What becomes startling is he discovered that there were many cases in which there were wounds whatsoever. So what we thought was metaphor of the unsettled ground becomes essentially there were people who were not shot but buried alive. And anybody who got out, and we have reports of anybody who got out, we have two versions of those reports that are well known. The first is the Black Book, and the second is the uncensored Black Book. My colleague and former camper, a fellow by the name of Joshua Rubinstein, just edited for Yale University Press the Black Book, which was the collection of testimonies from this area that Joseph Stalin did not want published. He had two very important people, Vasily Grossman and Ilya Ehrenberg, publish the one book, and then the censors took out the other one, which was different in tone. We now have access to this material, and we discovered precisely what's there. And it means that what was moving was not a metaphor, but it was the attempt of people buried alive. The attempt of people buried alive to gather, but it also shows us interesting evidence, for example, of mothers who fell upon their children to protect them from bullets, of fathers who laid themselves out over their family, and you have 2 or 3 kids under there, none of whom have any wounds whatsoever, but who were not strong enough to push their way out, which is the only way that certain people survived. The point being that we now get a much more intricate description of the killing process, not at the point at which killing was impersonal, but at the point at which killing was deeply personal. What do I mean? If you've ever taken a course with me or heard a lecture from me from the Holocaust, you understand that in my work I say the transitional moment in the Holocaust was the moment that they went from mobile killing units, mobile killers and stationary victims. They reversed it. They made the victims mobile, and then they made stationary killing centers. What made the victims mobile was the vote card, and what made the killing centers effective was precisely it had depersonalized the killing. And therefore, if you look at staff reports, I did the memorial at Belzec, and we looked at the staff report. 500,000 Jews were killed at Belzec in 10 months, with the gas chambers not working for 2 of those months, so effectively 500,000 were killed in 8 months. 2 known survivors. The staff was 104. So they relied upon an industrial process of murder. But here you have an evidence before it became industrialized, when it was personal, when it was one on one, bullet by bullet, person by person, that the circle of responsibility was enormous. And the circle of responsibility was far than we presumed, and now we have to speak of this time not only as Einsatzgruppen, but Einsatzgruppen and Wehrmacht, and German Army, and local gendarmerie, and to use Jan T. Gross's work, and neighbors. Neighbors who had learned that essentially he who does the killing enjoys the spoils. And the very interesting thing that we have, and this is the theologians and psychiatrists, is that these men and women who have lived with these stories at 1 minute to midnight want to confess and want to show the evidence. Let's switch for a moment and talk a little bit about a second sphere of research that has developed and that is now reaching a certain fruition. Omer Bartov once said that there are 2 histories of the Holocaust that met like this, meaning they never touched. The Germans believed that the Jews were so dehumanized by the situation which they faced that nothing Jews did mattered. And the Jews believed that the Germans were so dehumanized that the perpetrator had no biography, no story, and the narrative was the narrative of the victim. And consequently, German history went in one direction, Jewish history went in another direction. There are now a whole range of people who are talking, and this is the brilliant contribution of Saul Friedlander, who has written 2 very powerful books. The last one was Years of Extermination. And what he did essentially was to narrate the story year by year, 6 months by 6 months, from the experience of the victims to the experience of the perpetrators, to the experience of the bystanders, to the experience of the Allied governments, to the experience of the Vatican, and to the experience region by region by region, area by area by area. And what becomes remarkable here is that you see that lots of things occur simultaneously, and every one of the players, large big players, other players, every one of the players has a role to play that is part of understanding them. And in telling Jewish time, he begins to understand precisely the differences in the way in which the victims experienced their experience and the perpetrators theirs. Let me give you a couple of examples.